All right, boys and girls, we are back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can email us, as always, at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. Happy to be joined once again by Ethan Strauss from The Athletic, who you can follow on Twitter at Sherwood Strauss. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.
Happy to be here.
I wanted to talk to you about a couple of different things, and then everything kind of exploded in the NBA over the past week and a half. And so that made this conversation all the more pressing. First, let's circle back to this whole thing that kind of got a bit of internet attention. This piece that you wrote for The Athletic that talked about the NBA's viewership problem. It prompted a lot of different responses. It included a slate conversation that we'll get into a little bit. Tell me a little bit about why you wanted to write that piece and why it's been on your mind of late.
I wanted to write it because nobody else was talking about it. The piece had this record scratch of a stat that NBA viewership on network, so the big games on ABC, it's down 45% this season versus what it was in the lockout season of 2012. So that is the NBA losing nearly half its known audience on big games in a span of 8 years, over a time in which much of the marketing of the league and much of the assumption within the sports media bubble is that it's ever ascending. The NBA on the way up, football, thing of the past, NBA, sport of the future. And meanwhile, in terms of commodifiable metrics of interest, going the completely opposite direction. So it was something I wanted to say. I did the math just back of the napkin of what the ratings were. It didn't require me breaking a story. It was just basically, you didn't even need a spreadsheet to do it. And I didn't even know when I put out the article, I said that according to my math, it was over 40% of a drop on TNT games since 2012, and over 20% on ESPN games. The final numbers there, it was over 47%, and it was 22% for ESPN games. So really bad all the way around. And I just felt the need to say it because there's just been so much coping. I've dabbled in this. I've written about it here and there, but whenever you talk about it, people come up with all these crazy excuses and they say, oh, streaming. Well, streaming actually does factor into Nielsen ratings, but that's another issue. So I felt the need to say it. And I also just felt the need to say that, yeah, politics is probably part of this. I don't know why it's so taboo to say the obvious thing. I've seen it. I see it in my life. I see it with people I know. We see it from our readers. They leave comments. They send emails. And so I just thought it was a fascinating situation where there was this huge phenomenon that was utterly taboo to notice. And given my personality, I kind of wanted to notice it.
So I want to take a step back for a minute because from my perspective, you touched on something there that I just don't fully understand. Why is it so taboo to suggest that when many prominent players and entities tied to a particular sport become far more outspoken about their political views, that it might drive some people away? Now, we're not even saying that that's the whole part of the story. You know, I certainly think that, you know, if you look back, for instance, at some of the drop in NFL ratings, that happened, politics, I think, certainly played a role there. I think it also played a role that in at least one of those seasons, we had a ridiculous number of starting quarterback injuries where you had just an absurd number of starting quarterbacks by the end of the season who had no business being on an NFL field to play. Like it can be all of those things. Why is it so taboo to just suggest that, hey, when people take more outspoken positions on things, some viewers might pull back from that or find that to be irritating?
Well, that's what fascinates me, because you start wondering, what is the psychology here? What is this about? Why are we incapable as an industry of admitting it? It doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when you are of the mindset, as many in media and sports media are, that America is inherently racist or whatever. Okay, well, if that's the truth, then they're not going to like the activism and they're going to turn off the game if you do believe in that interpretation. So it is self-refuting. It's absolutely incongruous. And I wonder at bottom, you know, there's an element of bubble. There's an element of everybody I know voted for McGovern here. But I do think there's something else here. I do think that there is maybe some cultural contempt here. There's maybe some resentment that these people you don't like out in the red states have some sort of say, have some sort of power over you. And you don't want to admit that. You just want to pretend it away and assume that everybody's going to believe what you're going to believe. So you see this funny back and forth of a lot of fans going, yeah, I don't like this. Oh yeah, okay, buddy, whatever, whatever. Yeah, I'm not going to watch anymore. Sure, you're not going to watch anymore. Yeah, like you mean that. Well, I didn't watch anymore and your ratings are really bad. Streaming, but it's obvious. It's so obvious. And that's why I so often feel as though I'm put in the position of explaining the obvious when I'm asked about it. And like you're saying, it's multi-factor. For the NBA, the most precipitous drop was after the China controversy with Daryl Morey, but there have been all these other factors. Any big phenomenon has many factors, but there is something telling in how it's taboo to acknowledge one of them. And I think it probably says a lot about modern media, not just sports media.
I want to get into that sports media question in just a moment, but first, let me make a comparison here that I don't mean as an insult to your profession. This reminds me of the people, the super fans who were spinning for Star Wars after The Last Jedi, because after that movie came out, which was super controversial, still made a ton of money, but was very controversial, they were all like, oh, shove your criticism. You didn't like, Princess Leia as Mary Poppins floating through space. You're still going to go out and see the next one. Now, as it turned out, that was the first Star Wars movie to be considered truly a failure, and the solo standalone Star Wars film. And I personally don't think it really deserved to be that failure, but there were basically all these people spinning it until that movie came out, where they were saying, oh, don't worry, it's still good, and everybody's going to go out because it's Star Wars. And then it turned out people actually punished it because they didn't like the last one. Sports is fundamentally entertainment. And so to me, the issue has always been, if the entertainment's good enough, then I can get over the politics. But if the entertainment kind of slides, if it's not as good as it used to be, if it doesn't have as much compelling things going on with it, if the movie is getting 2 stars instead of 4, then the politics becomes one more reason to not go to that movie or to not watch that sport. It becomes more vulnerable to the vagaries of people's decision-making processes if there's just one more reason to say, maybe I won't do that because this guy who I used to like just said something that I don't like. To me, that just seems very straightforward and no different than, a Hollywood actor who, has a big movie and then goes out and says something negative about the United States right before it comes out. The movie has to be pretty good in order to overcome that. Why within the world of sports is there this feeling that, at least among the people who cover it, that they deserve to be completely insulated from those market decisions?
I do not know. Maybe it's a want for us to be involved in something more important than we're actually involved in. As Pat Riley has called it, we are in the toy department of human events. And you look at a situation like this one recently with the pandemic and everything that has followed, it makes you take stock of your life and makes you perhaps look at your profession and go, oh my God, what I do is meaningless. My life is meaningless. You get real meta real quick. So maybe it accelerates the phenomenon. But to what you're saying, one of the issues here is, you're right. If the entertainment is top notch, you will set everything else aside. But the idea of what the entertainment is informed by how it's discussed and how it's presented and how it's marketed. And there's a certain suspension of disbelief that's required for sports. You want to buy into the idea that this is an epic conflict between these two teams, and this really matters a lot. It's a lie in many ways. It's trivial at bottom, but you need to believe that it's true in the moment. And one of the issues the NBA is having is that it's insinuating that something else is more important, and maybe something else is more important. That's fair. Jason Tatum, when the NBA did this, I suppose it's a strike and not a boycott is the lingo on it, but he was saying, look, how many points I score, whether we win, it doesn't mean shit to me right now. And that's fair for him to feel, and that's understandable. But the problem with the NBA is that they told the country basically that the emperor has no clothes, and then the next day said, oh my God, look at the beautiful velvet mantle on the emperor. Even if the people agree with the politics, you're insinuating that there is a bigger world out there of more meaningful things, and what they are engaged in is ultimately trivial. And that does undermine the actual entertainment experience.
Do you feel like part of the problem for these writers is similar to something that exists within the political sphere, where everyone wants to be Woodward and Bernstein within a certain generation of like Gen X of reporters who came up? They all wanted to uncover some, deep dark conspiracy and become famous for exposing it. It seems to me like sports journalists all want to be writing that big feature piece about Muhammad Ali, and so they're just desperate to like, I got to find this thing. I want to find this subject. It's got to be about more than that. When for the fans, it's about who wins. Like, what we care about is who wins, and winning is the thing that is more important than anything. But sports writers have this like jaded attitude of like, well, I mean, it's not really important, like what's going on there. It's more about what this means about society or what it says about our culture. It's not about who wins the game. And that's something that's just foreign to the fans.
Well, I think the conversation is dominated by people who are trapped in that boomer template of who's the next Muhammad Ali. But to be clear, in NBA journalism, I don't want to seem like I'm condescending to my colleagues. I am routinely impressed by the caliber of the work of other people in NBA journalism, and they're really great at their jobs. And I think that they fundamentally want to be engaged in that and in the mechanics of the sport rather than some of these bigger issues. But to what you're saying, it is true. There is this template set that the great heroes of the past in the 60s use their platforms for social justice and activism. And there's something to that. And Muhammad Ali was brave. And now there's this platform guilt that is set in among a lot of celebrities and athletes where you just hear them talk about it all the time. I got to use my platform. Got to use my platform. A friend of my wife's was asking, what is your husband doing with his platform, such as it is? And I think what people might be missing is that back in the day, there were only a few platforms. Now, there's a ton of platforms. And for the most part, even if we might pay attention to you a little bit because you're a celebrity, we're not going to listen to you if you're telling us stuff we disagree with. We're not just going to go, oh my God, this guy who's really good at sports told me to vote for this candidate. Guess I'm going to do it. And that's how somebody like Taylor Swift, for instance, is weeping because her impassioned pleas to vote for a senator fell on deaf ears. And so I think that's getting lost in the mix. There's a lot of, we need to use the platform. We need to make life better. We need to tell people what to do. We need to dictate morality from on high to get these idiot plebs to, do the right thing. And they're missing that they're all doing this. And if you're all doing this, the market is oversaturated and nobody's listening.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, considering the number of a platform is a very easy thing to have nowadays, it seems like. And so the threshold for what you do with it, to me, seems much lesser in importance. And to your point, given that so many of these people have such huge followings, it's not like that suddenly puts them in a position where we have to turn them into moral arbiters of what we're doing. Otherwise, I mean, are we really going to cede all of that to Dan Bilzerian just because he has all those Instagram followers?
Yeah, well,
not a good idea.
And nobody around them is tapping them on the shoulder and telling them that. Nobody's saying, hey, at some level, it's interesting LeBron says more than an athlete, because I think Laura Ingraham quite rudely said, shut up and dribble. Yeah. And it kicked off this activism within the NBA. And the problem is, it's almost a doth protest too much, because the sad truth of the matter is that most people do regard you as that. That's what they see you as. And when you start saying do this or do that, they don't go, oh my God, this is the most brilliant man of our time. They go, well, he's good at basketball. I don't know why I want to listen to him on this issue. And there's really no changing it. And you see that not just from him, but from other people. I remember, Greg Popovich has been inveighing against white people and all the bad things white people have done and what white people need to do. And I'm just watching Greg Popovich and I'm thinking, I don't remember when the whites got together and elected Greg Popovich Pope of the Whites. I don't remember when that happened. And I don't think people accept that premise in San Antonio, even if they like the
championship. You were on vacation. Folks meant to tell you.
Yeah, they had the smoke and everything. And they elected Greg Popovich as the man to give us moral instruction. But because these are powerful people within their own orbit, and they do have their sycophants, nobody's going to say, hey, I hate to break it to you, but people don't really see you as the arbiter for them, and they find it condescending that you think you're that.
Well, on a certain level, I kind of compare it to, I mean, there's so many people who are so skilled at so many different things. I have an email, for instance, today encouraging me to donate to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris from Yo-Yo Ma, who is incredibly talented. I've seen him perform, amazing. But I don't necessarily take his advice about things, about politics, just because he's a great musician, any more than, I was listening to Bill Burr's podcast earlier today. Bill Burr says like all sorts of crazy crap. He also makes me laugh. I disagree. I agree with him. I can make my own judgment. It's not like a situation where just because someone's incredibly skilled, it gives them this position where they have to inveigh on all these different aspects of public life and culture. I wonder if this whole recent incident, which I do want to get into, is setting themselves up for a situation where they now have to do these types of things going forward. Because in this circumstance, obviously, and you can describe what happened for our listeners, taking a significant stand like that, considering perhaps, suspending or striking for the rest of the season, not finishing out the playoffs, this moment of tension that happened there that all these media folks were cheering on. The thing I had in the back of my head was, there aren't a lot of shootings like this that happen during the course of a year. You see the statistics and we can debate what those are, but there's not a huge number, but it's not zero. And it works out to, 1 or 2 a month, basically, in the course of an average year of armed police officers shooting an unarmed black man, or having, an incident that could be conceived as along those lines. So does this set a precedent where we're now going to have a league stoppage or a potential strike anytime one of these incidents happens? Because we're a huge country and there's lots of interactions with cops. And even in the case of Jacob Blake is the most recent one, this is a situation that has to be adjudicated. But if people are in the position of these prominent NBA figures, and then feel like they have to take a stand that's that significant, we're going to deny you the rest of the season because of our political opinion about this, perhaps not with any real clear logic of what they want to achieve. What's going to happen when this happens again in October with the NFL? Something along those lines.
Yeah, it's a situation where, look, the players, they own half of the basketball related income. It is their prerogative. I don't look at it as like, oh, I'm so mad that you're, going on strike or boycotting. If you genuinely feel that's what you want to do, that's your money at stake and you're doing it. But there is that mission creep of whenever there is an incident, and I think Twitter has really driven home the Joseph Stalin construction that 1 million deaths is a statistic and a single one is a tragedy. You do wonder if this is just going to happen again and again. And it does start to perhaps mess with the money, where these broadcasters, and the NBA right now is desperate for a new TV deal because they are really headed for an iceberg financially if they cannot get people in stadiums next season. And if they sign a new lucrative TV deal, then they can open up lines of credit. But if you're a broadcaster, you're looking at the situation, you're going, okay, I'm going to budget these games, and they can just be called off because of whatever Jack Dorsey thinks is popping in the algorithm potentially. I mean, that's precarious. And again, it's their league. It's what they want to do. I do want to circle back to the celebrity thing, because I just had a thought, a free association with it. Maybe this is happening in part because Trump won and he was a celebrity and that helped get him in the game. And so maybe there's almost the wrong lesson learned from all of this, because it could get you in the game. Trump's talent, though, was to cup his ear to the crowd of the Republican primary voters, understand what people were cheering and understand what they were laughing at when he was on the stage, and start mirroring back to them what they wanted to hear. But I think the lesson people might have learned from it all is that if you're a celebrity, you can just be the Pied Piper and get people to say or do whatever you want to say. So
I think that wall broke down and he became, you basically had a TV star, reality TV star, who also happened to be wealthy, who basically behaved as kind of this insult comic, for lack of a better term. And so I think that did kind of create a new scenario where a lot of people who have many of those different traits feel like they can have a bigger impact on the conversation. Walk us through what took place over the past week. And in particular, I'm curious about the role that LeBron James played in all of this as it hashed out.
You're walking me into a situation where I have to tread lightly because I feel as though I know more than what is said, not to a T. This sometimes happens in journalism where you've been hearing things, people have been telling you things, but you don't want to necessarily stand on that. So the LeBron role is very interesting, is what I will say.
Well, let me just ask this. Let me just ask this, and
Yeah.
then you can no comment it. Andrew Schultz repeated a rumor that basically when LeBron stood up in the meeting in the conversation and threatened to leave, that CP3 basically said, "Go ahead." is there any truth to that?
I cannot confirm or deny, but Andrew Schultz and I have a mutual friend,
Okay,
a very good friend of ours.
Okay.
That is true. And by the way, Andrew Schultz is funny as hell.
Yeah.
So not every player was happy with how LeBron conducted himself in that meeting is the upshot of it. But the basics of it are that the Milwaukee Bucks had the first game of that day, and they did not walk out, and it set off, it was cascading. It was a domino where a bunch of the other teams and players weren't necessarily of the mindset that we're not playing today, but because the Bucks had done it, they didn't want to be insufficiently supportive of that. And so at least for that day, they didn't play. And then the next one, and they had this meeting where they were arguing. And to my understanding, Chris Paul and then Andre Iguodala, both high up in the players union, both very smart guys. I've known Iguodala for years, somebody who is obsessed with math and money in a way that is uncommon. And I think they basically said, guys, this is what happens to the money. This is what happens if we stop playing. And then it was, okay. Well, I think we've made our point, because it's quite a bit of money that they would end up losing from all of this. And that's not to insinuate that they don't care or aren't passionate or anything like that. But it was just too much of a sacrifice, I think. And so the players went right back to it. But now you're stuck in this awkward phenomenon of Emperor's New Clothes, and also that we know that they were talking about the money. We know they weren't in that meeting going, we can't deprive the fans of this. We care about them so much, and we care about these games so much. That wasn't really the tenor of it. It was, here are the financials. Okay, we're going to go right back to pretending that these games are the most important thing in the world for the cameras. So the whole thing, pretty awkward, I would say. And maybe there's a taboo against remarking upon how awkward it is in my industry. We have to instead say, oh my God, they did something very important that will, I don't know, get Joe Biden elected. I have no idea. I don't know what the upshot of it will be. I just know I don't want to be too glib about it, because I know that the players themselves did take a risk and are hurting. And I think it's just not a fun thing to experience on social media, these snuff films effectively that are put out there. And that does rewire your brain, and it's graphic and it's sickening. And so it's understandable that they would want to do something and also be frustrated that they're trapped in this bubble and feel like they can't really do anything about it. But it just all led to, I think, a lot of strategic incoherence.
I wonder to the degree to which this is driven by the fact that they are in this literal bubble, surrounded by members of the media, incapable of interacting with these communities in different ways. And therefore, the only thing that they kind of have is this feedback loop of people egging them on to do something that they deem to be socially significant, even though it really isn't in the big scheme of things, I would argue. That, when they take a step like this, I saw all of these different journalists, including ones I've never seen post about the NBA, say things that, oh, this is so stunning and brave. And I was thinking to myself, yeah, this is going to be pretty short-lived because, there's going to be some fundamentals here that exert themselves. And, I wonder if, to a certain extent, I understand that I think this pain is real. I don't think it's performative for the most part. I would maybe take issue with LeBron on a little bit of that. But the idea being that for most of these players, this is not just something that they're doing just to get the retweets or to get the social love in general. but that they don't really know what to do, and that this is like
Yeah.
something that someone's put in their head as an idea. But to me, I wonder, in terms of your own view of what they ought to be doing, what is a better approach on their behalf? Because I've heard people make suggestions about, well, they should just, band together to start a nonprofit or do something that, is designed to have some type of more lasting impact. Because once you stop playing the games, you lose your platform. People change the channel, they go to something different. And, while it may be a news story for 24 hours or so, people tend to move on to something else.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe players smarter than myself will come up with something that makes sense. Again, I have trouble accepting the premise that the public is deeply invested in what the players are telling them. And you can use your money towards certain ends. It seems that voting has become the big thing with the NBA. And we're opening up the stadiums to voting. It seems all, or a lot of it's based on this premise that if everybody votes, then, we're going to get the things we want.
Yeah.
The outcome is going to be different. And you wonder if they ever consider the possibility that everybody's going to vote and they're not going to actually get what they want. I mean, I also wonder how many journalists in sports and otherwise are aware that in most polling, BLM has lost support over the last 3 months.
Yeah.
And I don't think that they necessarily know that or have questions about that or wonder about that. In the civics poll, which is done by the Daily Kos, so it's a progressive polling outfit, and you can look at it, and BLM has a plurality of support, but it does not have a majority of support in the public, which I think would shock. It would just shock a lot of people in sports media. And not only that, but its negatives have risen over the last few months. So there's this question of, and I think this is another taboo thing, are people who are prominent talking about it in a way that's counterproductive? Are they not bringing people into the fold of it? Are they speaking in a way that has people turning their backs on it? But these questions are never asked. And I think that they're, frankly, I don't want to say never allowed to be asked, because here I am asking them, but there's a lot of taboo and there's a lot of fear, and nobody's admitting to the fear. That's the other element that we're not discussing. Yeah. Whether it's the coaches or the media people, there is a deep, searing fear of social ostracism and getting fired. Mm-hmm. And that is a huge component. Coaches especially. I see these coaches, including Greg Popovich. I've known coaches for years. This is not their politics. This is not their worldview. You hear coaches talk about players, and I'm not going to say that it would make Bull Connor blush, but I would say that they have a lot of opinions that they would never, ever, ever, ever want to share with the world. And it reads as false. It reads as overcompensating. And people look at it and know, wait a second, you're in this awkward scenario where you are the coach of Black dudes in their 20s who earn more than you and can get you fired if you are angering them, and yet you're supposed to be their boss, and you're just flailing neurotically and trying to do whatever you can to present some sort of image. And you could maybe extend that to the media, where it just seems like we're very much animated by a fear that nobody can concede. And that's another component in all of this.
Talk to me about the financial situation the NBA finds itself in. You mentioned the TV contracts earlier. Who's really on the hook to them at the moment, and what is the path forward for them, given the type of uncertainty that's been demonstrated this year about these different factors playing into whether games are played?
Well, gate revenue, I believe, is around 40% of the NBA's revenue. Now, the local team for me, the Warriors, it's even more so, because they signed an unfavorable TV contract when they bought the team before they became these world beaters. So they still have that TV contract they signed when they were this woebegone franchise. And they spent their own private money on $1 billion stadium in the last piece of good land in San Francisco. And we're just assuming that they were going to be able to print money with all these concerts. I get an email every week that Bruno Mars or Celine Dion has canceled the concert. And so all of this money that they could reliably count on to validate the venture has gone up in smoke. So not every NBA owner is in that position. There are some who are wealthier, guys like Steve Ballmer, who have more money than God and will be fine. And there are others in private equity and real estate and in businesses where they are more insulated because the stock market has done well. But they are going to take a massive financial hit from not having that 40% of gate revenue. And again, what's floated the NBA to this point, I think, is having an inflated TV contract. The NBA did not validate the price of the TV contract that they got last time. And that's why guys nobody had ever heard of just got these insane salaries. And it got the system kind of out of whack. I still think that the next TV contract should be more than the last one, but that's because so much of TV otherwise cratered relative to it. But at least for when the NBA signed it, it just wasn't where it was supposed to be. So in a way, like a lot of corporations, you get a little fat and lazy, you get a little fat and happy, and you get a little too comfortable. And I think that's where the NBA is. And what we're looking at right now out of the pandemic is a real reckoning is coming unless they can get creative.
Are they effectively negotiating with a limited number of people who are interested with them when it comes to re-upping their TV contract?
That remains to be seen. I think you would probably want to lock Disney in because they are such tight partners. Disney owns ESPN, as many people listening know, and they've been joined at the hip. And Bob Iger loves his status with the NBA. That's also part of it. He loves being friends with Chris Paul and having his name in a story about getting the bubble going. So they're almost co-partners. I think the real trick of it is finding that other partner. I don't know if AT&T wants continued NBA rights. AT&T owns Turner, so owns TNT. I don't know if they want that. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. But the early returns right now, I don't think are so great. And if you're a channel like TNT, you wonder, why are we spending billions of dollars on TV rights for something that doesn't seem to have the return? Shouldn't we get hard at work to develop the next version of The Closer or whatever other show is going to draw interest for us? That might be a real question. And so all you need is two bidders, as the aforementioned Andre Iguodala said about contract situations. And so it's really, they're going to be in an okay position to get that second one. But one of the reasons why I think I get phone calls from the NBA and I get emails and they're really mad at me is they don't want anybody messing with the money like this. They don't want anybody decreasing interest. And even if everybody knows the numbers, and even if everybody knows, for instance, they're going to change the way Nielsen ratings are done this week. So they're going to count in-home or out-of-home ratings in hotels and airports to kind of fluff it up. Even if everybody knows that's a bit of a work, you're scared that some executive is going to read something, maybe in The Athletic, subscribe today, and go, yeah, I don't think so. Or maybe it's less. There's big money at stake right now.
Mm-hmm. You are scaring me by threatening to break up the Chuck, Ernie, Shaq dynamic that has given me such joy. I'm not doing
it. It's given me such joy. And it does seem like a little bit of a readout. It does seem like a little bit of a refuge of dudes who don't seem like media dudes being dudes on television, and not just dudes. Obviously, they don't have just men on the broadcast, but just people who feel authentic. Even if there's massive celebrities, there's something about Charles Barkley and the way he is that feels authentic and utterly detached from social media. And it just seems like, yes, we should protect that at all costs.
Yeah. I'm curious, when it comes to the positioning of the NBA compared to other sports, has the pandemic really hurt them in an outsized manner, just given the timing of this TV deal situation and given the percentage of gate?
I think so, because their path forward is the most complicated. At least with baseball, you could go, hey, I mean, this is the easiest joke to make since I'm an A's fan. You just have the A's games right now, and there's enough distance between the people. I mean, that's generally what happens anyway. You've got outdoors. Outdoors is better. So that benefits baseball. That benefits the NFL. They can figure something out to at least recoup some of the expenses. I can't comment on hockey because I'm from San Diego. It seems like an interesting idea. I don't have much tangible interfacing with it, but that seems tough for hockey. But yeah, I think basketball, because of the indoor aspect, has been disproportionately hurt by this circumstance, and it is a hell of a challenge for them to figure out.
Is there any self-analysis being done by the members of the sports media, as you see them, about the way that they've covered these past couple of weeks, to be kind of a little bit self-critical and say, maybe we shouldn't overreact in the future to incidents like this, or build them up as being, as big as Ali, when there's nobody being threatened with prison time for not playing. And when it turned around on a dime so quickly, even as we were all getting ready, or probably in the process of writing our lengthy feature pieces about how stunning and brave all of this was.
There might be that analysis, but honestly, I think there's too much fear. And
Yeah.
I don't know though, because I always wonder the range of it. I always wonder when I log onto Twitter, the rare times I do, I try to detach from Twitter, which might be why some of my commentary is different. I use it only as the hollow PR platform it deserves to be. I just share links to my articles for
Yes.
95% of what I say. But when I do look at it, I always wonder to myself, are they saying this genuinely? Is this what they genuinely think? Or is this informed by fear? Or is it the Upton Sinclair construction of it is difficult for a man to understand something when his salary is dependent on his not understanding it? I don't know. I think there is an element of fear where, yeah, maybe there are these thoughts that creep in that we should handle these in the aggregate, these incidents or these stories in a different way that's a little bit more honest. But on an individual level, you don't want to stray from the herd. You don't want to get criticized. You don't want to get potentially fired. And I think that is a powerful force. And again, it's one that people, I mean, how often do you hear somebody admit that they're afraid? You just you don't hear that. You hear it in secret. You hear it anonymously in the John McWhorter article on Academia on how everybody's secretly afraid. But I think that fear tends to keep the messaging in line.
I know that there is a dynamic that happened within the political sphere, where once political journalists got on Twitter and started being far more open with their thoughts, their stray ideas and beliefs, it became very evident what people's biases were, not just ideological, just things as hating particular people or disliking particular entities, or things like that within the whole sphere. And then that colors the way that people view them as analysts, where they know that that's a factor in the way that they approach things. Something similar happened with sports journalism, where, at least for me, I would watch the analysis of various people on TV. And then once something like Twitter started to exist, I became aware that, it's not just that you dislike that draft pick or that you have an issue with that trade. You hate that team and the front office and the owner, and you think that they are all terrible. And sometimes it's the local team. Like sometimes it's, the local guy who hates them, more often than not, perhaps because of hating what's closest to you, hating what you love. But it's also something that factors into the way that people then view them, and they pay attention and they say, well, now we can discount his analysis because there's no way he can judge these trades fairly. Do you think that sports journalists are aware that that's something that, intelligent consumers of what they do can see very, very evidently?
Well, I think first of all, it's almost taboo to consider the fan right now, which is crazy. I think that's one of the reasons perhaps, and I didn't read every reaction to what I wrote, but I think sometimes it's controversial, not just because of the political valence, but just you're not supposed to ask what the fans actually want or what they're into, which is crazy. We exist at their pleasure. They pay my salary, certainly, but that doesn't seem to be part of the dynamic. And I think to what you're saying is it because it's because it goes both ways. It's not just the fans looking at the journalists and the journalists saying things that make the fans sour on them. It's also that the journalists are imbibing toxic content from the fans who are talking at them. And the way our brains work, the way it all goes, is we don't really remember the compliments. That's just water off a duck's back. Wait, we say that when it's criticism. Anyway, wrong metaphor. Whatever. The bottom line is, let's say it's water through a sieve, right?
Yeah.
We don't even really absorb it. But the criticism triggers the fight or flight response, and we remember the criticism. So over time, through Twitter, the sports journalist is conditioned to hate the normie fan and to go, these fans are awful, they're terrible, I hate them, look at my mentions. And then you'll look at their mentions and it'll be 9 compliments and 1 really nasty comment. But that's the one we remember. And that, I think, is informing a disconnection and a chasm between the sports journalist and the sports reader.
Tell me a little bit about what life is like at The Athletic, which is, a media entity that obviously is designed to replace or to help, be kind of a new form of the high quality journalism and writing, which has, thanks to the death of so many local newspapers across the country and other media entities, really gone away over the past decade plus.
I mean, I'm trying not to be a company man, but I certainly love working there. I worked at ESPN and now I'm at The Athletic, and it just feels as though when you really take out a lot of the other noise, you can focus on making something better. At ESPN, since it's multimedia, they give you, God, you know that when I was a kid, they had this song of, "Hi, my name is Joe, and I work in a button factory,"
yeah.
And you keep taking on more jobs in the song until you can barely talk because you're holding your tongue and holding your nose. That's what it felt like at ESPN. It felt like, as Charles Barkley said of Stephen A. Smith, that when I go to bed, he's on the TV. When I wake up, he's on the TV. They work you to death, and they always have some multimedia platform, and they have, hey, we've got this thing that is, it's going to replace Twitter theoretically, and hey, can you do this? And hey, can you do that? And you start to go crazy. At The Athletic, it seems like the mandate is simpler and thus easier to fulfill. It's basically write good thing happens. Get subscriptions. That's the metric. Get people to subscribe, get them to read. That's how we know things are going well. And I think the incentives drive a better product, in my opinion. When you're not worried about advertisers or tricking people into clicking on it, but instead passing it along to their friends because they like it, I think that's helped me as a writer to do better, or at least I hope it has.
When you look out at the landscape of what's out there in sports media, there's a lot of different buckets. There's, the type of high quality writing that you're talking about. There are the vestiges in cities that can afford it of the old guard newspaper approach to things. ESPN obviously still sustains a lot of local team focused reporters. But then we also see, lots of layoffs. We see the local NBC Sports, sort of layoffs, the furloughs that obviously are going to happen for the Pac-12, things like that. Where do you see the healthiest aspects of sports media today? And where do you think that there are real risks and potential problems for people who cover this as an industry?
Wow, that's a great question. I think the whole sports industry has been hit really hard by the pandemic and the pause on sports. And so it's been a bloodbath. But I guess I've never accepted the premise, at least on a personal level, and maybe this is just some story I tell myself to give myself proper motivation, but I've never accepted the premise that I'm owed any of this. I wish I were, but I view myself as an entertainer, and show business is rough. And maybe you get fired, and maybe you just don't make the cut because there are only so many people in the room who can really get paid enough to make a living. I mean, at least in NBA journalism, I could probably fit them into this garage that I'm speaking to you from. So I've always come at it from the premise of this is very precarious. And to quote The Godfather, this is the life I chose, right?
I chose this life. We've chosen. Yes.
Yeah, this is the business we've chosen. This is it. And I can't complain because, maybe I could have become a lawyer or done something else, but I didn't. I chose this because this seemed more fun. And so ultimately I have to deal with the risks, and I have to be enterprising, and I have to come at it from the perspective of, okay, what am I going to do to propel my own success? Because we are just constantly on a melting ice flow, and where am I going to take this? That has to be the mentality. And so I would just say to anybody getting into it, it's a lot of fun. If you have the right approach and if you have the talent, you can earn a living. I don't like when people portray it as impossible. I've been lucky enough to earn a living doing this. But you have to have the mentality that it is inherently precarious, and thus you have to achieve above and beyond to maintain within it. I wish that weren't the case. I wish it were the 1990s and it was more of a stable profession, but that's just not where we're at.
One more question about sports media. Obviously, ESPN made the decision to go fully corporate, to wed itself to these corporate sports leagues, entities that would then care about the kind of content that they were putting on, which effectively works to promote their product all day long with kind of silly debates and faux back and forths and things like that. Given that today it seems like the people who have the biggest microphone, the biggest megaphone in this space are folks who become kind of outsized personalities that are perhaps less corporate friendly, just given their willingness to criticize in a lot of different directions. The Dave Portnoys, the Clay Travises, the people who have basically a combination of, sports jock with, someone who's willing to do ridiculous over the top things or wade into any debate where they want to have kind of an intense reaction and become therefore controversial figures. Do you think that ESPN kind of made a mistake, that they lost something significant in order to become the quote unquote worldwide leader by becoming so closely wed to these various entities that they end up being, not necessarily the place that breaks the big story about these leagues? I think, for instance, of this most recent big one about the Washington football team that was broken by Tory Clark and, the Washington Post. Something like that might have had more difficulty finding its way into ESPN, just given their relationship with the NFL. Do you think that that's kind of a trade-off that we should recognize more?
So I think you're talking about a few different things, and they're all fascinating. I mean, one is just the inherent conflict of interest of a news service being partners with the league itself. So that's just a fascinating one. And the other one is, I think you might have been insinuating that maybe the money is on the unwoke side, for lack of a better term, and however you want to define that if Clay Travis is making money, if Barstool is printing money, then why are the suits not going for that money? And that is fascinating. I'm still puzzling over that. It does seem as though to sports journalists, we keep hearing something again and again, and it's something athletes tell me, you guys just want the clicks. You guys just want the clicks. You guys just want the clicks. I don't know if that's the case. Yeah. There is a way to get clicks and there is a way to get money, and people don't go for it because it's not worth the ostracism within the industry. And so there's a fascinating dynamic happening where, whether it's corporations, whether it's sports journalists, they're often doing things and saying things, and this maybe brings our conversation completely full circle, that undermine their bottom line because the social forces propelled by technology are that compelling, and the narratives within them that are favored need to be upheld even at the expense of the cash, which I don't think anybody would have ever expected as an outcome. But increasingly, I'm convinced that's the case. Increasingly, I'm convinced that for a lot of people, whether they're in corporate America or whether they're in media, narrative, the favored narrative, is more important than the bottom line. I think we're seeing that.
We certainly learned that within the political sphere. Nothing can question the narrative. Ethan Strauss, you can follow him on Twitter at Sherwood Strauss, and you can subscribe to The Athletic to read all of his work. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me today.
I look forward to getting canceled for doing this. Thanks for having me.
I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.